Okay, welcome to the Hobbit Battle of Five Armies review. Kinda sad to be completing the Hobbit trilogy. This was fun to do, but let's go. First scene I want to talk about, and it's not in order, is the scene with the Council dispelling Sauron. And more specifically, one thing I noticed that makes me change what I said earlier, that it looks like Saruman was already corrupted. We have the scene where Galadriel shows up first, and Elrond and Saruman, and they're holding their own against the Nine until Sauron shows up, and Galadriel shows her true power and dispels him. But the main thing I notice is once Saruman sees a full glimpse of Sauron's power, he's equally mesmerized and horrified. And after it's done, he's somewhat dismissive about warning Gondor. And I think after this is the moment where he goes back to his tower, starts using the Seeing Stone, and ultimately begins communing with Sauron and turning. But the beginning of the scene is great. We get the death of Smaug, which picks up pretty much where the last movie left off, in Bard having to escape from prison, Bard's son leaving the boat where Evangeline's character's trying to get his kids to safety, and Bard got an arrow and bows, but he has the wrong, a bow and arrows, but he's got the wrong arrows and he can't pierce Smaug, so his son takes the black arrow, and we get a scene where the bow is destroyed. So he has to use the broken bow to make a makeshift crossbow, and his son stands in front of him so he can rest the arrow on his shoulder, and they kill him. And I like the father and son working together to kill Smaug, and he ultimately lands on the master of Rivertown and kills him, who unfortunately had kicked Alfred off the boat a few moments earlier. Quick amendum to my previous review. I was wrong when I said the master wasn't in the book. It was about 5 years maybe since I read this book, and upon my research, he's in it, but he's briefly mentioned, so I guess you can say I was both right and wrong. In the book, at the end, he steals some of the treasure and starves in the wilderness, presumably. But then the next scene is Lake Town reacting to the crisis. They go to kill Alfred, and Bard stops them because it's basically, look, winter's upon us. The time and energy you can put into doing this may make you feel better for a second, but it doesn't make our situation any better. And he gathers men to go to Erebor to get what they're owed. Keely and Evangeline Lilly's character have a nice scene where he gives her the Dwarven ruin that his mother gave him. And again, even though I don't buy this romance and I don't think it belonged, I can't deny the scenes between them were not very well acted. And they go to Erebor only to discover Thorin in the grips of dragon sickness. He's so obsessed with the treasure, so obsessed with the Arkenstone that he's even like, nobody sleeps until I find it. Which leads to, okay, here's my take on dragon sickness. Some people think it's a mental thing. Some people think it's a spiritual thing. I think it's both. It's both. It's something that starts in your head and slowly begins to snake its way into your spirit. Where we get some nice stuff while that's going on, the people of Lake Town had went back to the ruins of Dale because it's better than nothing, and King Theoden shows up and he brings food for them, and he's basically there for business with Thorin, but he's playing the politician by helping the people of Dale out because he's hoping they'll side with him with whatever comes. But it shows that Theoden isn't totally that far lost, where Bard's able to convince him, let me conduct business with Thorin, maybe I can avoid bloodshed, and he's all but too happy to let Bard do it, which is nice. Before that, we have Frodo caught with his caught by Thorin because he's got his hand in his pocket and he's like, "What do you have?" And it's an acorn from uh, Beorn's garden. And this is a nice moment because Thorin, he sees it, he's kind of impressed, and he even legitimately smiles. And I think had the people from Lake Town not showed up, had one of the dwarves not interrupted them, Bilbo could have pulled Thorin out of his dragon sickness. Thorin ultimately denies them, and we do get some great scenes in this whole thing with him with dragon sickness, where you hear him talking, but you also hear Smaug's voice mixed in. It's great. It shows how lost he is. It leads to Bilbo climbing down from Erebor to give the people of Lake Town and the elves the Arkenstone so they can bargain. And when they do, and Bilbo comes forward, this is a nice scene because he's like, I gave it to them. I'm taking it as my claim of the treasure that was promised to me. I wanted to give it to you, but you become lost in this. You're not the Thorin I know. The Thorin I know would never go back on his word, never turn his back on the people of Lake Town in need. And for a brief moment, Thorin is visibly heartbroken because he knows he's right. That scene is beautifully well done, and the only thing that saves Bilbo is Thorin has a healthy respect and fear for Gandalf, and when Gandalf's like, "Don't you dare harm him," Thorin lets him go, and even the other dwarves know Bilbo did the right thing. You can tell by their reaction. Why this is going on, Legolas and Evangeline Lilly found out there's a trap going on with the orc army, and Bilbo and Thorin's cousin shows up, and right as they're about to battle the elves, the orc army shows up. And what I like, even though it's bad, it's CG and it never should have been, one thing I will give the combat in this is you do see the tactics of individual armies a little more, like how the dwarves use their shields to form a Roman-style shield wall, and then as they're doing that, the elves rush into battle, leap over them, and engage the orcs. And then the dwarves very tactically go into battle, and that's nice to see. Thorin at this point is locked in the mountain and refuses to leave. We get good stuff with Bard helping protect the people of Lake Town, leading the people in the battle. More stupid stuff with Alfred, not even going to get into it. And the Battle of Five Army is pretty fast-paced. Ultimately, we get the climax of the dragon sickness where Thorin basically threatens to kill one of his company because he's like, basically like, we need to be out there fighting. Our people are out there spilling blood for us while we lock ourselves in the mountain, and Thorin threatens to kill him. And we get my favorite scene in the movie. Thorin's alone in the Hall of the King, and there's that newly made gold walkway from the gold they tried to drown Smaug in. And as he's walking, we see the shadow of Smaug underneath him in the gold. And he has a vision of himself drowning in the gold, and then he takes the helmet, throws it, and he walks into the hall to see the other dwarves getting ready to go into battle. And one of them's even like, you may be our king, but we have to do this. And Thorin basically tells him, you're right, and even though I know I have no right, I'm asking you to let me lead you one more time. And they get behind him. I like it because Thorin, he didn't come as Thorin King Under the Mountain. He came as Thorin Oakenshield, asking his friends to join him one more time. And before this is going on, Thorin's cousin, we even see him screaming on the battlefield, "Where's Thorin?" And it's not that Thorin and his company are that good they can single-handedly turn the tide of the battle. It's that Thorin is that much of a master tactician, which we see. Once he gets on battle, he immediately goes for the command center. And that's when the rest of the armies find out it's a trap, and Bilbo goes to save him. Before I get into that, I do want to bring up one really cool scene with Thranduil where his stag rushes into the city. He impales a bunch of orc with its horns, pulls his sword, and cuts their heads off. And he ultimately makes the call to his men are pulling out, and there's a great scene with Evangeline Lilly's character where she tries to stop him, and then Legolas turns his back on his father. But we had found out earlier that at the other orc fortress, that's where his wife was killed. So we find out he's a man that was driven mad with grief. And because of his son turning, the army stays. Bilbo warns Thorin, and then we get the scene where Fili and Kili was killed, which is hard to watch. Kili had become my favorite in in Unexpected Journey, and I knew what was going to happen to his character. He's killed in front of Evangeline Lilly's character by Mr. Over-Designed Orc, and I hate that Legolas gets the killing blow. I feel she should have, but I like how before he kills him, because Thorin helped him, he's on a makeshift bridge that was once a tower, and above on the lake is Thorin. He tosses Orcrist, killing a orc that's about to kill Thorin after Thorin helps him, and there's just that brief nod and moment of respect. Then Overdesigned gets killed with one of Legolas's fighting knives. We get the fight between Thorin and Azog, which Thorin realizes he's fighting a Dark Souls boss and he has to fight smarter, not harder. And because they're on the lake and they're on this broken sheet of ice, he grabs the mace, tosses it to Azog, jumps off, and he falls in the lake. And then he makes the decision of following him and gets stabbed in the foot. And it ultimately leads to him having to let Azog mortally wound him so he can kill Azog with Orcrist. We get a very heartbreaking farewell between Thorin and Bilbo where he's like, I'm glad you showed up so we can depart as friends. And he said if more people had your values, the world would be a merrier place. At this point, the Eagles show up and they come with Radagast and Beorn, and that turns the tide of the battle. We get another emotional scene where Evangeline Lilly's mourning Kili, and she asked King Theoden, why does this hurt so much? And him, with full sympathy because he knows what she's going to, says because it's real. Which was a great scene. And then when Legolas is like, I'm not going back home, his father directs him to find the Dunedain and find Strider or Aragorn. And he's even like, his father was a good man. He could be a great man with the right guidance. And he even tells him, they call him Strider, but you have to find out his real name for himself. I like the farewell between Bilbo and the orcs because the dwarves, because he basically tells them, if you're ever in Bag End, this is when I eat, don't bother knocking. Which, that's the biggest compliment you can really give someone, to say, hey, if you're ever in the neighborhood, you know where I live, don't even knock. Just come into my home. He's essentially, it's your home as much as it is mine now, and you're welcome anytime. He goes back and gets the treasure they buried in the first movie from the trolls, and actually has to stop his house from being auctioned off. And it begins with a beautiful shot of him holding the ring, and then we see old Bilbo's hand, and it goes into the beginning scene of the Fellowship of the Ring. I'm going to give this movie a B-. I still enjoy it even though it's the weakest. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. Over and out.